wanting me to speak only English to her since I learned English. And one day, one night, I heard my parents speaking in the kitchen. I woke up from sleep and they were speaking in Russian. And I realized that I didn't remember Russian anymore. I couldn't understand what they were saying. I had forgotten Russian because I hadn't used it. I never forgot Yiddish, which I learned from my grandmother in Russia. I never forgot that because my mother continued to speak that a lot, so I remembered the Yiddish. But I totally lost the Russian, which really bugs me. I'm mad about that. I was mad about it when I discovered it, but she didn't. Oh, that was one of the things about people who migrated, immigrants at that time, who left countries, had no intention of ever going back. You know, not like it is with your mom in Brazil, where she wants to go back all the time. When my family and all of my relatives left Russia, it was goodbye forever. We don't need the language. We can forget Russian because we're never coming back for anything. So it was a different attitude about leaving.
Why did they all plan on never going back?
It was escape.
It was
There no
dangerous.
turning
But
back.
didn't they think it would change? Or they'd go back?
No, nobody ever, I don't know, I didn't question them. My impression is that nobody ever intended to go back, and as far as I know, nobody ever did. After the revolution, the Russian Revolution, there were some people who went because they believed in the revolution and they thought there would be a good life there. So I know people who went back. And when I visited there, I met some people who were related to people I knew in California. I looked them up, and they had emigrated to Russia because they were interested in the new society. But in my family, nobody ever thought of returning to live in Russia. I'm saying that with regard to their not hanging on to the language, because my aunts and uncles had forgotten their Russian too. They spoke Yiddish, but nobody spoke Russian. So they were pretty rusty. So I could speak to them in Yiddish, but the kids didn't speak Yiddish. So I was 6.5 when I came. I was 7 when I entered school, and I entered first grade because of my age. I didn't go to kindergarten. And I was very excited. I always wanted to go to school. I was very excited to go to school. My mother was working, so my aunt took me and registered me. And I got into some class with a bunch of kids. And my recollection is sitting around on the floor in a semicircle. And the teacher was at the blackboard. And she put up a problem, an addition problem, something like 2 and 2, something simple like that. And nobody raised their hand. Well, I knew the answer, so I raised my hand, and she nodded calmly, and I shouted out the answer in Russian. I can't begin to tell you how shocked everybody was, like I had just come down from Mars. They all turned to look at me with their mouths open, and the teacher wasn't any better. She seemed to think I'd just come from Mars too. Well, I think that's the most embarrassed I have ever been in my life. I was so humiliated. I felt just so terrible that I vowed to myself that I would not speak another word at school until I could speak in perfect English. For 6 months, I didn't say anything. At the end of 6 months, I opened my mouth and out came English. I was okay.
What's the story Carmen remembers about the teacher belittling you for speaking Russian?
I think that was the same
Well,
story.
Oh, is that it?
It
You
was-
were just embarrassed, everybody laughed.
It was just her amazement, you know, that it was like I was an idiot, you know, if I had just babbled something. That I was inappropriate. I was making up some sounds. I was misbehaving in her eyes. That I didn't have enough, you know, sense. I didn't. So anyway, that's an experience I remember. So I always did well in school, but I had a really bad time with my name. I had a Russian name. I was Celia pt.2. That's a long name. And when I started to learn to write my name, I had a great deal of difficulty differentiating the D and the B. They're next to each other. pt.2. And I couldn't figure out how to make them. So I remember myself at this long blackboard, and I needed the whole blackboard to write my name. And in the middle, I was struggling really hard with the D and the B part.
I think in Russian, a B is a D and a D is a B.
And that name really bugged me always, because whenever the teacher read out the class roll, you know how they do when they get the class and try to identify each child, they could never pronounce my name. They always had to stop and stumble and ask me how to pronounce it, all of which resulted in all of the kids staring at me, which was something I really didn't want. The only mischief that I can remember that I did
That you choose to remember.
in elementary school, the mischief that I remember is that the teacher was out of the room, or had to be out of the room, I think. I would flip my eyes. I knew how to do that in
Your
eye
eyelid.
examinations, so that just the whites showed. And I would turn and stare at the kids, you know, and they would scream. I thought that was a great trick.
I hate that chick.
I was not a mischievous child, but I really liked doing that. Sort of got even for all of the humiliation that I had suffered. It was a way of getting even. I did that. Okay.
Why don't you stop and let her